hot new tech tends to come with a pretty high price tag, but over time, that cutting edge does tend to trickle down to lower price points. Sometimes though, that tech just seems to get stuck. We wait and we wait and we wait, but yet it never becomes more affordable. Case in point, electronic group sets, or at least they were a case in point, but not anymore. Sram have just taken a big step forward by introducing this, which is eTap AXS for Rival, their third tier group set for road and gravel bikes, thereby opening up the performance of eTap to many, many more people. Let's start with the headlines. Rival eTap AXS gives you electronic wireless shifting with the same electronics and function as the top-end Red and Force group sets. It's gone 12 speed, just like Force and Red. It uses the same distinctive gear ratios that SRAM call X-range. So smaller chain rings paired with a 10-tooth sprocket at the back, giving you a broader range and smaller jumps between gears. There is a 1x and a 2x option. The lever hoods have shrunk even compared to Force and Red, and it's disc brake only. Plus, there is also a brand new power meter option too, which adds just $249 to the price if you opt for it. Before we dive into the specifics of Rival eTap AXS, let's talk more broadly about eTap AXS in general, because I'm sure many of you haven't had the privilege of riding eTap yet. So let me fill you in on some of the basics. eTap AXS is SRAM's own wireless shifting setup. They use proprietary encryption for the shifters to communicate with the derailleurs, and it's the same one that's featured on their mountain bike AXS group sets, meaning the whole ecosystem can talk to each other, giving you the option of mixing and matching, so sticking flat bar shifters on your road bike or a Monster Eagle mountain bike cassette and rear derailleur on your gravel bike. No wires means it's easy to set up and looks super clean, but going electronic has also allowed SRAM to change and simplify how we shift. So now on eTap AXS, if you shift the left lever, then you change into an easier gear. If you shift with your right lever, you change into a harder gear. And if you press both levers together, it moves your front derailleur. Super intuitive. Because it's wireless, each shift component has to have its own little battery. These ones on the derailleur last about 60 hours of riding, and the little light on the derailleur goes from green to red when you start to get low and you need to recharge them. To do so, just pop them off the bike and stick them in the recharger. And the levers have little CR2032 batteries, which last a long time. Although it's been refined and updated since its first launch back in 2015, eTap now is tried and tested. It's like part of the cycling furniture. It's 6 years old. There is nothing scary about the wireless bit. It's been proven in the most extreme conditions around. So there is your crash course in eTap. Let's dive into the specifics of Rival eTap AXS then, because there is a lot to tell you about. Like its more expensive siblings Force and Red, Rival eTap AXS has also gone 12 speed, and it also uses SRAM's slightly reimagined gear ratios called X-range. Now this is where, in essence, SRAM have fitted a really small 10-tooth sprocket on your cassette to allow them to use slightly smaller chain rings up front. This saves a little bit of weight, but it also has allowed SRAM to improve front shifting, they say, by keeping the gap between chain rings a consistent 13 teeth, no matter which option you choose. In this case, you can either have 48-35, 46-33, or 43-30. But you still get the range because of the cassette. There are two cassette options available, 10-30 or 10-36, which is the maximum size of cassette that this Rival mech can handle. Because of that 10-tooth, the range of gears is wider than the equivalent standard ratios, despite the smaller gap in chainring sizes, plus having 12 sprockets at the back makes the jumps between them smaller. Now, in order to fit those 12 sprockets in the same space that you'd normally have 11, SRAM have decreased the space between those sprockets, so it's not compatible with 11-speed cassettes. You also need a different, narrower chain, and you can see here that Rival borrows the same flat top technology as Force and Red, which, let's face it, as well as making the chain stronger and apparently longer lasting, also looks flipping amazing. The rear derailleur also features a clutch as standard, so that keeps the chain under close control, whether you're either running a single chainring up front or a double chainring. And then perhaps most importantly of all, as well as sharing the same wireless access protocol as Force and Red, Rival also shares a lot of the same hardware. So the transmitters, the receivers, the motors, the batteries are all the same, so that functionally it should be identical. And it also means that you can still connect Rival eTap AXS up to your head units to display what gear you're in, just like the more expensive group sets. And of course, it's compatible with the Sram AXS app as well, which allows you to keep track of battery life or reconfigure the shifting as you wish. Now, here is a nerdy little tidbit for you, right? So I asked SRAM about the evolution of eTap, and they told me that between first and second generation, which was launched in 2019, they changed the chips and the motors, which is why first and second generation aren't compatible with each other. But that change is what's actually allowed SRAM to introduce more affordable group sets, starting with Force in 2019 and now here with Rival in 2021, after 2 years of product development. So there are a lot of similarities between Rival and Force and Red. I mean, it's wireless, it's 12 speed, these components work with the more expensive group sets and vice versa. So what are the differences then? What have SRAM changed to allow them to save money? Principally, there are some changes in materials. So from more expensive materials that are perhaps more labor intensive to more affordable materials. So think carbon to aluminium, like on the crank arms, also on the lever blades and on the rear derailleur cage there as well. And that all adds a little bit of weight. In some cases, features have been simplified a little bit. So the clutch on the rear derailleur is a spring clutch as opposed to the fluid damped orbit chain management system on Force and Red. And on the lever body, they have removed the ports that allow you to attach remote shifters called blips. This does, though, have an upside. It's this that's allowed SRAM to shrink the diameter of the lever body. Now, this might be to your taste. It definitely is to mine, and it's certainly good for people with smaller hands, particularly as reach adjust is still there on the levers, so you can really get them tailored in. As I mentioned a moment ago, those changes in materials do add a little bit of weight to the group set in comparison to Force and Red. An example would be the rear derailleur with that metal cage. It's about 40 grams more than Force, about 70 more than Red. The crankset's the big one, 100 grams more than Force and 300 grams more than Red. A total group set in comparison to Force has about a 220 gram penalty if you're using a double chainring setup, but only about 100 if you're using a single chainring. Interestingly, the power meter option adds just 40 grams, and I think SRAM are justifiably proud of this little gizmo, the Quark Rival power meter. So you've got strain gauges in the crank axle, and it measures the force coming from your left leg, and then multiplies it to give your total power output. It uses a AAA battery, which SRAM say lasts about 400 hours. The fact that it's a AAA, I think, is excellent news, because it's much easier to nick a AAA battery out of your TV remote than it is to find a little circular CR2032 lying around the house. Although that AAA battery does need to be a lithium battery, it's worth saying. But should your new SRAM Rival equipped bike not come with the power meter option fitted, you can simply buy a new left-hand crank for about $249. Now, this talk of price leads us on to, well, talking of price. If you were to go out today and order a complete group set, it's going to set you back about $1,639, about £1,516, or 1,688 euros. Now that is for a complete 2x group set with a power meter. For 1x with no power meter, it drops to $1,190, £1,102, or 1,288 euros. Now, that doesn't sound like a budget group set. I think it's probably worth pointing out that not all that many people go out and order complete group sets, and those of us that do are probably used to seeing those artificially low prices, heavily reduced group sets on supermarket style bike websites. So actually what's probably a better barometer of the cost of this group set is how much you can buy a complete bike for. So it's going to depend on the manufacturer, of course. We believe it'll be in the region of about $2,500 to $3,000 pounds euros. So again, not exactly entry level, but it's about 1,000 cheaper than a current cheap electronic group set equipped bike. Now, one thing we haven't touched on yet in this video is the aesthetics. And I know it's personal, but for me, I think this group set is an absolute knockout. I think it looks super cool. And yes, it is less expensive than Force and Red, but I don't think it looks less expensive. I think it looks great, honestly. Now, I also think it's great that SRAM have made this move and made a rival eTap AXS group set, because the difference between mechanical and electronic is one of those key performance jumps that you get when investing more money in a bike. So for this to be more affordable, within reach of more people, is only a good thing. Now, of course, it's not within reach of everyone, but I'm not saying that mechanical group sets are bad, not by any stretch. Mechanical group sets are still great. I have 2 mechanical group sets on 2 of my own bikes, but you do notice the difference in performance between mechanical and electronic. Finally, before leaving this video, I just want to say how super exciting it is about how good mid-range bikes are now. I mean, they can be incredibly capable, they can be incredibly aerodynamic. You can have your disc brakes, your carbon wheels, and now you can have electronic group sets too. Everything that pros have, just a few hundred grams more, but crucially, for a few $1,000, euros, or pounds less. That's pretty cool.